The cell was cold and dark. It had been cold and dark for 3 years now. Commander Cassius Varro sat against the metal wall, his body covered in scars that told the story of his suffering. His beard had grown long and wild. His muscles had wasted away. But his eyes still held fire. The Valdari Imperium had conquered 400 species across the galaxy. They had built an empire that stretched across 10,000 star systems. Their technology was beyond anything humanity had ever seen. Their warriors were perfect killing machines, grown in tanks and trained from birth. Their emperor was worshipped as a living god. And yet they could not break one human prisoner. Cassius had been captured during the first contact between humans and the Valdari. He had been sent as part of a diplomatic mission, a gesture of peace from Earth. The Valdari had responded by destroying his ship, killing his crew, and taking him prisoner. They wanted information about human worlds. They wanted to know human weaknesses. They wanted to add another species to their collection of slaves. Cassius gave them nothing. The interrogators came every day. The Valdari were tall beings, nearly 12 feet in height, with skin that looked like living crystal. Their bodies shifted colors based on their emotions: blue for calm, red for anger, black for killing intent. Cassius had seen all these colors many times. They used machines on him that sent pain directly into his brain. They put him in rooms where gravity crushed him flat against the floor. They locked him in complete darkness for weeks at a time. They played sounds that drove other species insane within hours. Cassius endured it all. The interrogators could not understand. They had broken Kethari warriors who were bred for combat. They had broken Morwan priests who believed death was a gift. They had broken every species they had ever captured. But this human, this weak creature from a small planet, refused to break. Word spread through the Obsidian Citadel, the massive prison station that orbited Thesara Prime, the Valdari homeworld. Guards would come to look at him through the energy field that sealed his cell. They studied him like he was an animal in a cage. They whispered about the human who would not scream. Cassius did scream sometimes. He was not made of stone. The pain was real and terrible. But he never begged. He never pleaded. He never gave them what they wanted. And when the pain stopped, he would look at his torturers with those burning eyes and say nothing at all. In the 3rd year of his imprisonment, Emperor Thesar IX came to see him. The emperor had ruled the Valdari Imperium for 400 years. He was ancient beyond measure, kept alive by technologies that bent the laws of nature. His body was covered in living metal that moved and shifted like liquid silver. His voice came from 3 different vocal chambers in his chest, creating sounds that vibrated through bone. When he entered the prison level, every guard dropped to their knees. The other prisoners in nearby cells pressed themselves against the far walls of their cages. The very air seemed to grow heavy with his presence. Cassius remained sitting against his wall. The emperor stood before the energy field and looked down at the human. His crystalline face showed no emotion. His living metal robes rippled slowly, like a calm sea. "You are smaller than I expected," the emperor said. Cassius looked up at the towering figure. "You are taller than I expected. Must be hard to find chairs." The guards around them shifted nervously. No one spoke to the emperor this way. No one had spoken to the emperor this way in centuries. But Thesar IX did not grow angry. Instead, something strange happened. His crystal skin flickered to a color no one had seen before. It was almost like amusement. 3 years, the emperor said. "My interrogators have worked on you for 3 years. They have used every technique perfected over 10,000 years of conquest, and yet you remain unbroken. Tell me, human, what makes you different?" Cassius slowly pushed himself to his feet. His legs shook with the effort. His body was weak and damaged, but he stood before the emperor of 400 worlds and met his gaze without fear. "You have conquered 400 species," Cassius said. "You have enslaved billions of beings. You have crushed every rebellion, destroyed every resistance. Your empire has existed for longer than my species has been walking upright." He took a step closer to the energy field. "But you have never met a human before." The emperor tilted his massive head. "You are one man. One small, fragile creature. Your body breaks so easily. Your lifespan is barely a breath compared to mine. What could you possibly do against an empire?" Cassius smiled. It was a terrible smile, filled with blood and broken teeth and absolute certainty. "I am the one they sent to negotiate," he said. "I came in peace, with open hands and kind words. I represented the best of what humanity can be. He paused, letting the words hang in the cold air. Imagine what we send when we are angry. For a long moment, the Emperor said nothing. The guards held their breath. The other prisoners watched from their cells with wide eyes. Then Thessor the Ninth laughed. It was a sound that shook the walls. It rumbled through the floor and echoed down the corridors. None of his servants had ever heard him laugh. Some of them would later say it was the most terrifying sound they had ever heard. I like you, human, the Emperor said. You have spirit. It would be a waste to kill you. He turned to the chief interrogator, a Valdari whose crystal skin had turned pale with fear. Keep him alive. He will be my trophy. A reminder of the amusing creatures that exist beyond my borders. The Emperor left. The guards slowly rose to their feet. The interrogator looked at Cassius with something that might have been hatred or might have been respect. Cassius sat back down against his wall. The Emperor thought he was being merciful. He thought he was showing his power by keeping the human alive as a curiosity. He did not understand what he had just done. He had given Cassius time, and Cassius, sitting in his cold, dark cell, began to plan. He watched the guards and learned their routines. He studied the energy field and found its patterns. He listened to the conversations that drifted past his cell and built a map of the station in his mind. 3 years of torture had not broken him because he had something the Valdari could not understand. Hope. Humanity was out there, among the stars. They would be looking for him. They would be preparing. And one day, somehow, he would find a way to help them bring this empire down. The Valdari had made a mistake when they captured Commander Cassius Varro. They just did not know it yet. The Valdari did not see the slaves. They walked past them every day without a single glance. The maintenance workers who cleaned the floors, the technicians who fixed the machines, the servants who brought food and water. These beings were invisible to the masters of the empire. This was their greatest weakness. Cassius learned this truth in the months after the Emperor's visit. His cell was in a deep part of the obsidian citadel, far from the important areas. The guards who watched him grew bored and lazy. They stopped paying attention to the broken human who sat quietly in his cage. But Cassius was not broken. And he was never quiet inside his mind. The first friend he made was a Velith named Sora. She came twice a week to clean the floors outside his cell. The Velith were a species with 4 arms and gentle faces. They had been conquered 800 years ago, and they had served the Valdari ever since. Sora was old, her gray skin wrinkled and tired. She had been born a slave, and she expected to die a slave. Cassius started by simply saying hello. The first time he spoke, Sora flinched, like he had struck her. Prisoners did not talk to slaves. It was not how things worked. She hurried away without responding. But Cassius said hello again the next time. And the time after that. He asked her name. He asked about her day. He told her stories about Earth, about blue skies and green forests and oceans that stretched beyond sight. Slowly, carefully, Sora began to talk back. She told him about her people. The Velith had once been artists and musicians. They had built beautiful cities filled with song. Then the Valdari came, and all of that was taken away. Now her people cleaned floors and fixed pipes and tried not to be noticed. They had forgotten what it felt like to be free. Cassius listened to every word. He asked questions. He remembered everything. And one day, he asked Sora a different kind of question. If you could be free, he said softly, what would you do? Sora stopped her work. She looked at the human through the energy field with eyes that held 800 years of sorrow. Freedom is not possible, she said. The Valdari are too strong. They have always been too strong. What if they were not? Cassius asked. What if someone showed you that they could fall? Sora did not answer, but she did not walk away either. And when she came back the next week, she brought a friend. This was how Cassius built his network. The Velith talked to the Kethari workers. The Kethari talked to the Morwan technicians. The Morwans talked to the Thessic servants, species that had never spoken to each other, that had been kept separate by their masters for centuries, began to share whispers in dark corridors. They talked about the human who would not break. Cassius became a legend among the slaves of the Obsidian Citadel. Guards and officers never heard these stories. Why would they listen to slave gossip? But in the maintenance tunnels and service corridors, in the kitchens and cleaning stations, everyone knew about the prisoner who had smiled at the Emperor. And Cassius used this legend. He sent messages through his network. Small questions at first. Where were the power systems located? What frequencies did the communication arrays use? When did the guard shifts change? The slaves knew everything about the station because they were the ones who kept it running, and they shared this knowledge with the human who treated them like people. But Cassius wanted more than information about one station. He wanted to know about the Empire itself. Sora introduced him to a Velith named Torek who worked on supply ships. Torek traveled between worlds, delivering goods to different Valdari stations. Through him, Cassius learned about the other conquered species across the galaxy. He learned about their anger and their fear, and their secret hope for freedom. Torek began carrying messages. It was slow work. A word here, a whisper there. But over months, and then years, a network grew. Not a network of soldiers or spies, but a network of the forgotten. Slaves who had been invisible for so long that no one thought to watch them. Cassius gave them one message to spread, one promise to share. When the Emperor falls, rise. Most who heard it thought it was a dream. The Emperor could not fall. He was immortal. He was all-powerful. He had ruled for 400 years and would rule for 400 more. But the message spread anyway. It gave people something they had not felt in generations. Hope. Meanwhile, Cassius continued to gather information. He learned about the Galactic Senate, a gathering of representatives from all conquered species that met once per cycle on Thesara Prime. It was not a real government. The senators had no power. They simply came to watch the Emperor announce his commands and to bow before his glory. But the Senate brought beings from across the Empire to one place, and it was broadcast across every world on 10,000 screens. Cassius began to form a plan. He shared pieces of this plan with his network. The Velith technicians told him which systems were weakest. The Kethari servants described the layout of the Senate building. The Morwan workers explained how the broadcast technology functioned. Every piece of information was stored in Cassius's mind like a weapon waiting to be used. The hardest part was patience. Cassius had to wait for the right moment. He had to keep pretending to be a broken prisoner while building a revolution in secret. Some days the weight of it nearly crushed him. Some nights he wondered if his plan was madness. But then Sora would come to clean the floors, and she would look at him with eyes that had found their first spark of hope in 800 years. And Cassius would remember why he could not give up. The 73rd Senate Convocation was approaching. Representatives from every conquered species would gather on Thesara Prime. The Emperor would sit on his throne of light and declare his power over the galaxy. Cassius sent word through his network. This was the moment. Everything they had built was leading to this day. 6 hours before the Senate gathered, Cassius was moved. The guards thought they were simply relocating a low-priority prisoner to make room for important guests. They had no idea that this transfer had been arranged months ago by a Velith technician who had changed a single line in a maintenance schedule. They brought Cassius to a storage level directly beneath the Senate floor. As the guards locked him in his new cell and walked away, Cassius allowed himself a small smile. Above his head, 12,000 senators were taking their seats. The Emperor was preparing to address his empire, and beneath them all, hidden in the forgotten places of the station, a network of slaves was getting ready. The Valdari believed their empire was built on power and fear. They were about to learn it was built on the backs of beings they had never bothered to see. The Senate chamber was the most beautiful place in the galaxy. It was a dome of transparent crystal that floated above the burning city of Thesara Prime. 3 suns blazed in the sky outside, painting everything in shades of gold and red. 12,000 seats rose in perfect circles around a central platform, where the Emperor's throne hovered on beams of solid light. The senators filed in slowly. They came in all shapes and sizes. The tall, insect-like Kethari, the heavy, stone-skinned Morroans, the 4-armed Velith, the slender, blue-scaled Thesic. Hundreds of different species, each one conquered, each one broken, each one forced to watch as their masters displayed their power. None of them spoke. Speaking was not allowed unless the Emperor commanded it. Emperor Thesar IX entered last. He floated through the air on a platform of light, his living metal robes flowing around him like liquid silver. The Void Guard surrounded him, 200 warriors in black armor who had never known defeat. They were grown in special tanks, trained from birth, modified until they were perfect weapons. Each one could kill 100 ordinary soldiers. The Emperor took his place on the throne. The broadcast drones hummed to life, sending images to every world in the Empire. A trillion beings across 10,000 star systems watched as Thessar IX raised his hand for silence. Beneath the Senate floor, in a maintenance tunnel that no one important ever visited, Cassius Varro was being freed from his restraints. Sora's hands were shaking as she worked on the locks. She was old, and her fingers were not as steady as they once were, but she had practiced this moment 1,000 times in her mind. "Quickly," Cassius whispered. "It has to be during his speech." The lock clicked open. Cassius rubbed his wrists where the metal had cut into his skin. He looked at Sora, at this old woman who had risked everything to help him. "Thank you," he said. Sora's eyes were wet with tears. "Make it mean something," she replied. Cassius nodded. Then he began to move. The maintenance tunnels ran beneath the entire Senate building. Cassius had memorized every turn, every junction, every access point. He moved silently through the darkness, his bare feet making no sound on the metal floor. Above him, he could hear the Emperor's voice rumbling through the structure. Thessar IX was announcing new tribute demands, more resources, more slaves, more worlds to be added to the Empire. The same speech he had given for 400 years. Cassius reached the access hatch that opened directly behind the Imperial throne. He waited, counting heartbeats. The signal came as a vibration through the floor. 3 short pulses. The Velith technicians had done their part. Cassius pressed a small device that Torek had smuggled to him weeks ago. It sent out a single frequency, carefully tuned to interfere with the neural locks that kept the senators paralyzed in their seats. Throughout the chamber, 12,000 beings suddenly found they could move. Chaos erupted instantly. Senators jumped to their feet in shock. Guards shouted warnings. The Void Guard formed a tight circle around the Emperor, their weapons raised and ready. But the confusion was a distraction. Nothing more. Cassius pushed open the access hatch and climbed into the Senate chamber. He emerged behind the throne, just as planned. The Emperor was facing forward, watching the chaos below. The Void Guard had their attention on the senators. No one was looking behind them. Cassius moved faster than he had ever moved in his life. 3 years of captivity had weakened his body, but 3 years of quiet exercise in his cell had kept him ready. He had spent countless hours doing push-ups against the wall, running in place, building strength from nothing. The first Void Guard died before he could turn around. Cassius grabbed his head and twisted with all his strength. The crack of breaking bones was lost in the noise of the crowd. The second guard spun and fired his plasma rifle. Cassius had already moved. He had watched recordings of Void Guard training through a crack in his cell wall. He knew their patterns. He knew their timing. The plasma burst missed him by inches. He took the rifle from the falling first guard and shot the second through the chest. The third guard came at him with a blade of hardened light. Cassius ducked under the swing and drove his fist into the guard's throat. Modified or not, the guard still needed to breathe. 4th, 5th, 6th. 7 seconds had passed. The remaining Void Guard finally realized the threat was behind them. They turned as one, weapons raised, ready to destroy the human who had somehow appeared in their midst. But Cassius was no longer fighting them. He was running toward the Emperor. Thessar IX turned just in time to see the human coming. His crystal face shifted to black, the color of killing intent. His living metal robes hardened into armor. His clawed hands reached out to stop this impossible attack. Cassius did not slow down. A plasma burst hit his shoulder. He felt the flesh burn away. He kept moving. A blade of light cut across his ribs. He felt the blood flowing. He kept moving. The Emperor's claw punched through his side. He felt the cold metal inside his body. He kept moving. Cassius grabbed the Emperor by his robes. He planted his feet. He pulled with every ounce of strength he had left, and he lifted Thessar IX off his throne. The chamber fell silent. 12,000 senators stopped moving. The Void Guard froze in place. The broadcast drones kept recording, sending this image across the galaxy. A single human, bleeding and broken, holding the immortal Emperor above his head. "You wanted to know what makes humans different," Cassius said. His voice was weak, but the drones picked up every word. 1 trillion beings heard him speak. "It is simple. We do not know when to quit." He threw the Emperor. Thessar IX flew through the air and crashed onto the Senate floor. His living metal robes tangled around him. His ancient body hit the ground with a sound that echoed through the silent chamber. For the first time in 400 years, The emperor of the Valdari Imperium lay at the feet of his subjects. Cassius stood swaying on the platform, blood dripping from a dozen wounds. He looked out at the senators, at the beings from 400 conquered worlds who had been forced to watch this moment. "He falls," Cassius said. "Gods can fall. Remember that." Then his legs gave out, and he collapsed beside the empty throne. But he had done what he needed to do. Across the galaxy, on a trillion screens, beings who had never known anything but Valdari rule watched their eternal emperor lying in a heap on the floor, thrown there by one man, one human, and something that had been sleeping for centuries began to wake up. 7 seconds passed in complete silence. The emperor lay on the floor of his own Senate chamber. His living metal robes slowly untangled themselves, flowing back into their proper shape. His ancient body remained still for a moment longer, as if even he could not believe what had just happened. 12,000 senators stared at him. They had never seen their master this way. They had never imagined it was possible. For 400 years, Thessar the Nine had been a god to them, untouchable, eternal, above all weakness and failure. Now he lay at their feet like any other fallen creature. The Void Guard recovered first. They raised their weapons toward the senators, ready to punish anyone who dared to move. But they did not fire. They were waiting for orders from their emperor. Thessar IX rose slowly. His crystal skin had turned a deep, angry red. His 3 voices spoke together in a sound like thunder. "Kill the human," he commanded. "Kill him now." 3 guards moved toward Cassius, who lay bleeding on the platform beside the empty throne. He was barely conscious. He had given everything he had. He could not fight anymore, but he did not need to. A Velith senator stood up. Her name was Counselor Metha, and she was very old. Her forearms trembled as she pushed herself to her feet. She had been a slave all her life, just like her mother before her, and her grandmother before that. 800 years of her people bowing and scraping and staying silent. She stood now. "Stop," she said. Her voice was quiet, but in the silence of the chamber, everyone heard it. The guards paused. The emperor turned his burning gaze toward her. "What did you say?" Thessar IX asked. Metha's whole body was shaking. Every instinct told her to sit down, to apologize, to beg for mercy. But she had seen something she could never unsee. She had watched a single human lift her god and throw him like garbage. "I said stop," she repeated. Her voice grew stronger. "You can kill us. You have always been able to kill us. You have killed billions of our people over the centuries. But he showed us something today." She pointed at Cassius with one trembling arm. "He showed us that you can fall." For a moment, nothing happened. Then a Cathari senator stood up beside her. Then a more one. Then a Thessic. One by one, beings from conquered worlds rose to their feet. The Void Guard raised their weapons higher. 200 of the deadliest warriors in the galaxy aimed at 12,000 unarmed senators. "Sit down," the Emperor commanded. "Sit down or die." No one sat down. More senators stood. The wave spread through the chamber like fire through dry grass. Species that had fought each other before their conquest stood together now. Species that had never agreed on anything found themselves united in this single moment of defiance. Within a minute, every senator in the chamber was standing. The Emperor's skin turned black with rage. "You think this changes anything?" he roared. "You think one human's trick means you can challenge me? I have ruled for 400 years. I have crushed every rebellion. I have broken every resistance. You are nothing but slaves." "We were slaves," Metha replied. "But slaves can wake up." As she spoke, alarms began sounding throughout the station. Warning lights flashed. Officers shouted into communication devices that were not responding properly. The network Cassius had built was not just inside the Obsidian Citadel. For 3 years, his message had been spreading across the Empire. Slaves on 1,000 worlds had been waiting, watching, hoping. They had been told to watch the Senate broadcast. They had been told to wait for the signal. The signal was an emperor falling. On mining worlds and factory planets, slaves stopped working. On military stations, maintenance crews shut down power systems. On transport ships, pilots changed course. The message spread faster than any fleet could travel. When the emperor falls, rise. And across the galaxy, they rose. Thessar the Nine received reports through his neural link. Uprisings on 40 worlds. Communication systems failing. fleet commanders, unable to reach their ships. An empire that had stood for millennia was suddenly shaking at its foundations. "This is impossible," he whispered. On the platform above, Cassius opened his eyes. He was dying. He knew it. The wounds were too deep, the blood loss too severe. But he had enough strength left for a few more words. "Nothing is impossible," he said. His voice was barely a whisper, but the broadcast drones carried it across the stars. "That is what you never understood about humans. We do not accept impossible. We do not surrender to fate. We fight until we win, or we die trying." He managed to lift his head just enough to look at the standing senators. "And now they have learned from us. All of them. Every species you ever conquered. You taught them to be slaves, but we taught them to be stubborn." The Emperor turned back to his guards. "Kill them all," he ordered. "Every senator, every slave on this station. Burn this place to ashes." The Void Guard raised their weapons, but they never fired. The floor beneath them exploded upward as maintenance tunnels collapsed. The crystal dome above cracked as sabotage support systems failed. The station itself was tearing apart around them, destroyed from within by the very slaves who kept it running. In the chaos, senators rushed to escape pods. Guards tried to maintain order as the floor tilted and walls came apart. The Emperor was surrounded by his remaining Void Guard, fighting their way toward his personal ship. Metha found Cassius on the platform. She gathered him in her forearms. This broken human who had changed everything. "Hold on," she said. "We will get you out." Cassius smiled weakly. "Get them out," he replied, gesturing to the fleeing senators. "They matter more than me. You started this. You have to see how it ends." "I already know how it ends." Cassius coughed blood, but his eyes were peaceful. "We win. Maybe not today, maybe not for years, but we win, because now they know the truth." Metha carried him toward an escape pod as the station crumbled around them. Other senators helped, forming a protective circle around the dying human. The Emperor escaped in his ship. He fled to a fortress world deep in Valdari space, surrounded by his remaining loyal forces. But his empire was already burning. On world after world, slaves who had never dared to dream of freedom found the courage to stand up. They had seen their god thrown to the ground by a single man. They had seen senators from 100 species refuse to sit down. They had learned that the Valdari were not invincible. The uprising spread faster than anyone could have predicted. It was not organized. It was not coordinated. It was simply a galaxy full of oppressed beings who had finally found their hope. And at the center of it all, passed from ship to ship and world to world, was a message from a dying human. Keep moving. No matter what happens, keep moving forward. That is how we win. Cassius Varo was placed in a medical pod aboard a refugee ship. The doctors, a mix of species who had never worked together before, fought to save his life. They were not sure they could succeed, but they tried anyway, because that was what he had taught them to do. The war lasted 11 years. It was not quick. It was not easy. The Valdari Imperium had ruled the galaxy for millennia, and they did not surrender their power without a fight. Their fleets burned rebel worlds. Their armies crushed uprisings with brutal force. Billions died in the conflict that followed the day Cassius Varo threw the Emperor. But the rebels never stopped fighting. The alliance of free species formed within the first year. It was a strange collection of beings who had never trusted each other before. Kethari warriors fought beside Velith engineers. Moroan soldiers shared trenches with Thessic scouts. Humans arrived from Earth with ships and weapons and, most importantly, with their stubborn refusal to accept defeat. They learned from each other. The Kethari taught combat tactics perfected over centuries of warfare before their conquest. The Moroans shared their knowledge of defensive fortifications. The Velith, who had been mechanics and servants for so long, turned out to be brilliant at sabotage and supply line disruption. And the humans taught them all how to be stubborn. It was not a military strategy. It was not a battle plan. It was simply a way of thinking. When you are losing, keep fighting. When the enemy is stronger, find another way. When everything seems impossible, refuse to believe it. Cassius Varo survived his wounds, but just barely. The doctors had kept him in a medical pod for 3 months while his body slowly healed. When he finally woke up, the war was already raging across 1,000 star systems. He did not ask for command. He did not demand to be made a general or an admiral. Instead, he asked for a rifle and a squad of soldiers from any species willing to follow him. Thousands volunteered. Cassius led raids behind enemy lines. He freed prisoners from Valdari detention camps. He trained new rebels in the art of resistance. His unit became legendary, a mixed group of humans and aliens who struck without warning and disappeared before the enemy could respond. The Valdari put a bounty on his head that would have bought a small planet. They sent their best assassins and their deadliest warriors to hunt him. None of them succeeded, but Cassius knew he was not invincible. He was just a man, getting older every year, carrying wounds that never fully healed. The war would not be won by one person. It would be won by all of them together. So he made sure to teach everything he knew to others. He trained leaders from every species in the Alliance. He passed on the lessons humanity had learned through centuries of their own wars and struggles. He showed them that strength was not just about muscles and weapons. True strength came from the heart, from the will to keep going when everything said you should stop. Emperor Thessar IX watched his empire crumble piece by piece. Worlds that had been loyal for centuries turned against him. Species that had been enslaved for generations found their courage. His generals lost battle after battle against enemies who refused to accept defeat even when they were outmatched. The emperor grew desperate. He ordered terrible things. He burned entire planets rather than let them fall to the rebels. He executed his own officers for failure. He retreated further and further into his fortress worlds, surrounded by fewer and fewer loyal subjects. In the 10th year of the war, the Alliance launched its final offensive. They called it Operation Sunrise, and it targeted the heart of Valdari power, Thessara Prime itself. Cassius Varro was 63 years old by then. His hair had turned gray. His body was covered in scars from a decade of fighting. But when the Alliance fleet gathered for the assault on the Valdari homeworld, he was aboard the lead ship. The Battle of Thessara Prime lasted for 3 days. Valdari fleets made their last stand around their son of 3 sons. Void Guard warriors fought to the death, defending their master. It was the bloodiest battle in galactic history. But the Alliance had something the Valdari did not. They had hope. They had purpose. They had the memory of an emperor thrown to the ground by a single stubborn human. On the 3rd day, Alliance forces breached the planetary defenses. Ground troops landed on Thessara Prime for the first time in recorded history. Cassius led the assault on the Obsidian Citadel, the same station where he had been imprisoned for 3 years. The fighting was brutal. Valdari warriors defended every corridor and every room. Cassius lost friends he had fought beside for years. He took wounds that should have killed him twice over, but he kept moving. They found the Emperor's throne room empty. Thessar IX had fled to a final fortress world, taking his remaining loyal forces with him. But his power was broken. His empire had fallen. His throne would never be sat upon again. Cassius stood in that empty room, surrounded by the bodies of fallen warriors from both sides. His soldiers wanted to celebrate. They had taken the enemy capital. They had won. But Cassius did not celebrate. He looked around at the destruction and felt only sadness for all the lives lost on both sides of this terrible war. "It is not over," he said quietly. "Not until everyone is free." The hunt for Emperor Thessar IX lasted another year. Alliance forces tracked him from world to world, breaking through his defenses one by one. Finally, on a barren moon at the edge of known space, they cornered him. Cassius was not there for the final battle. His wounds had finally caught up with him. He lay in a medical bed on an Alliance cruiser, too weak to fight anymore, but he received the message when it came. The Emperor was dead. The war was over. Cassius smiled and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, Counselor Metha was sitting beside his bed. She was very old now, her forearms thin and frail, but her eyes were bright with joy. "We won," she said. "Because of you, we won." Cassius shook his head weakly. "Because of all of us. I just showed you it was possible. You did the rest." He died 3 days later, peacefully, surrounded by friends from a dozen different species. His last words were simple: keep building, keep hoping, keep moving forward. The Alliance honored his wishes. They did not build statues of him or name holidays after him. Instead, in the new Galactic Senate, the true Senate where every species had an equal voice, they left one seat empty, a human-sized seat, with no nameplate, no decoration, no special honors, just an empty chair to remind everyone of the man who had started it all. Above the seat, carved in 1,000 different languages, were 3 words: he kept moving. In the centuries that followed, the galaxy became a different place. Species that had been slaves for generations learned to govern themselves. Worlds that had been stripped of resources began to heal. Enemies became allies. Strangers became friends. And whenever someone asked why humans were so difficult to defeat, why they never seemed to give up, the answer was always the same story. The story of a prisoner who spent 3 years planning one throw. The story of an empire that learned fear. The story of a man who showed the galaxy that gods could fall. Not because he was special, they would say, but because he was human.